Hello and welcome to another edition of the RevOps Lab podcast. My guest today is Daniel Foulkes. Daniel, very warm welcome.
Thank you. Happy to join.
Could you give our listeners a short introduction about yourself and where you work and what you do?
So I'm the Senior Marketing Strategy and Operations Manager at CoachHub. So we are a digital coaching company for enterprise businesses. Basically, we provide one-to-one coachings and also one-to-many coaching services, but we do it online. So we do this through our own platform, and we have our own analytics. We also have our own coaching lab, and we also develop a lot of the science around behavioral science and how companies interact with each other. But I live behind the scenes in the caves of the operations. I'm now in the revenue team, but I started within the marketing team, and then I switched later to the RevOps team. But me, myself, I come from academia. So I did those extensions of my studies. I did a couple of master's degrees in South Korea and also in Australia in security studies and political science. And surprisingly, political systems are a little bit less complex than business systems, but then you have to deal with all the other human sides. So it's also very complicated, but it's a nice challenge to have.
Great. And so how did you end up in operations then? So coming from academia, studying security, like security and politics, I guess.
Yeah, political science. So I also have a background as a journalist. So I was also very interested in media and how it played out. And then I relocated to Europe and then joined the tech scenes in a marketing team. So they say once a marketer, always a marketer. But because I come from this trying to analyze political systems, it was always about, can I find the data to back this up? When we talk about changes in politics, well, what are the actual measurable things that I can use, right? I come from a very social science perspective. So within the marketing side of things, I also help with some HubSpot integrations and implementing HubSpot. And that sort of led me to become involved with databases, how they work, and also the CRM. And from there, it was a jump into operations and how do those systems work? And what is the difference? Like, how is it that Salesforce can be great for some things, HubSpot can be great for others, and then how teams react on it? It's a great study for like how organizations grow, but also I find it fascinating to sort of find elegant solutions to complex problems. And then the marketing teams across all industries have a lot of problems when it comes to systems and tracking. And then attribution it has been a very big one that we've tackled at CoachHub. And one where we have developed a system that I'm proud to talk about today.
Great. Yeah. I think, marketing, there's like these two sides to marketing. One is the flashy, shiny, like where you create all the ad creatives and do all the commercial shots for cool ad campaigns and so on. And then there's the very technical side of things. That's sort of like under the hood, and that's a lot of work where you also need to find creative solutions sometimes. But it really has very little to do with like that sort of like other like very shiny part of marketing. Yeah.
You're right. There's a side of it. Like we have teams we have some marketers, they do great online and offline events. They go to conventions to have stands that look amazing, designers that do great things. Our digital team does ads, is super targeted. And I come and say, well, guys, the CSV here looks wrong. Let's look at that. You misplaced the semicolon. It's going to overwrite the data. So I look in the other end, right? It's about how do we track these things? How do we get those engagements? And well, this is how we came across it. When I joined the marketing team at CoachHub, it was very clear to me from the start that these are high performer individuals. They do a lot of activities, right? This is we sell an online service, right? So it has to sort of get that gap across in showing something tangible or something that they can touch at an event. And then online, there has to be a follow-up. How to track this is something that it was very important for us to say, well, it needs to have at some point a digital touch point. So we need to track when they go to an event, but do they come to the website? Are they in our database? Do we follow up on them? And then that's sort of where it actually started coming from. So marketing, are you bringing new business? Are you bringing leads? Are you influencing them? And the never-ending question of what's the ROI of what you're doing? Because marketing isn't cheap. And to do very good marketing, you also need to put a lot of money behind it, right? So at every point, every stakeholder is looking at those expenses and say, well, are we getting the best deal out of this? And what's the ROI?
Yeah, you're already raising, I think, a lot of very important questions that hopefully we can address in the next 30 minutes or so. But yeah, like you said, I think in this episode, we're trying to fully focus on marketing attribution. This is the second episode that we're doing on the topic. Charlie Saunders, we did a show with him a few months back on his custom object that he's using in Salesforce to optimize marketing attribution. And today we want to, take a sort of a similar look at how a marketing attribution can be done, also based on example of Salesforce in combination with HubSpot, and go a bit deeper. The last one with Charlie was very focused on the specifics of this custom object. And here we go a bit broader. So on the traits of a marketing model, why it makes sense, how complicated it needs to be, but then also definitely make sure to dive into the technical setup of it. So before we talk about the model itself, maybe you could briefly explain so how sales works at CoachHub and what the role of marketing is in the sales process, like the importance of MQLs versus SQLs. And that would, I think, be important to sort of frame it.
Those are the never-ending questions. What is an MQL and an SQL? So
yes.
Within our revenue on the sales-driven organization of CoachHub, we have the marketing team, which I'll go into a bit more detail soon. We have a sales development team that sort of does outbound cold calling, sequences new prospects. We have the account executives who also do their own prospecting as well, but these are the ones closing deals, right? They get the warm leads, they do the discovery calls that the sales development team bring them. And then post-sale, we have a customer success team that sort of looks at making sure that the tool usage is correct, right? That they're getting the most out of it. And they also assist on the renewal side. And on top of that, then we have the revenue operations team that sort of helps them both with the tools, targets, tracking, all that jazz, sort of related to them, giving them each a tailored service, right, to sort of help align them differently, right? Not pulling the strings, not at all, but basically sort of we are at their service and we want to make sure that they have the best tool stack and the best sort of the best processes possible. Right? And we also arbitrate. But the marketing team that we have, we do a lot of digital activities and we do a lot of on-site activities. So we've sort of been dividing them between regional marketers that do things, they own their own regions, and then the digital team that supports them individually, but they also grab a global agenda. We also have a brand and design team that also looks at our public relations and also the design for the various collateral that we make, various collaterals. So the marketing team is big and they do a lot of things. So it's always been a mix of how can I track you as much as possible? And then how do we attribute it, or how do we make it, how do we weave a story that makes sense about the expenses that you've been doing, and the returns that we get. So because we do all these combinations of activities, we look a lot into, for the marketing team, we're really focused on, are you bringing in new revenue? and by new revenue, we mean both new leads, but also new logos that we haven't sold to before. Or have you expanded that logo in a different book of business region, right? In a different zone. So now it's really focused towards, hey, you guys need to drive new revenue, but we also want to track, can you influence deals? Can you accelerate? Does the deal cycle change when there's marketing touch points? So for us, that's also very important. And we've managed to come to a point where we actually say, well, the marketing team has targets and we tie them not on MQLs, SQLs anymore. We actually say, how much influenced revenue do you have? How much sourced revenue do you have? And also, how's your pipeline looking when it's sourced, right? So we've actually managed to push those marketing results that we track them by to the end of the funnel. We still care about all those other metrics, but it also changes the conversation a lot more, because then the marketing team is very driven towards the end of the sale, not just the acquisition of the leads.
And so I understand, like, the source revenue. The other thing you mentioned was impact.
Influence,
influence. Sorry. Could you explain that?
So we do some differences. We look at the marketing lead. We look at all the prospects, our leads, so to say, and we basically look: do you come from a marketing activity or not? That's what sourced you. But even if you are not sourced by the marketing team, have you been influenced? Have you actually gone to our website, clicked our ads, downloaded a collateral, attended an event? And can we track those to sort of say, hey, even though the sales team sourced you, have you been touched by marketing in other points? And we're also trying to do that not only at the contact level, but for example, for client marketing, to have client marketing campaigns where we say, hey, actually, we are doing this for an account. And every deal that comes in after this particular period should be influenced, right? Because we've done a specific client marketing campaign, for example.
Got it. Okay. Great. So maybe then. So my understanding is basically the marketing attribution model that you developed at CoachHub. It serves for different goals. So there are the influence goals. There are sort of like the revenue source goals. There's like, in the revenue source, there's also like differentiation between selling and new logos. That seems like quite a few goals that you have there. Is it just one model that solves for it, or is it split into different components? How does that work?
So you ask a very good question. I think at a very high level, it's always about the fact that targets drive behavior, right? At the end of the day, when you say to someone, hey, these are your team targets, these are your individual targets, they're going to be really focused on those. And it's okay. We want people to do those. But it's also about how do we frame it into the sense that, yes, you want to drive sourced revenue, but well, what does that mean? It means I have to source new leads or new logos and bring them over. And my lead has to be the one that the SD talks to, and then they pass it on to their AE. And if the meeting is good, we say, hey, this also works for the SD targets. But for the marketing team, this lead that they brought gets put into the opportunity. You have sourced this opportunity, right? And there's different things that you can consider regarding like your sales cycle. Maybe it's super long, or maybe it's very short, and you want to have like a time decay variable where you say, hey, if marketing brings it and it's in this short amount of time, then they source 100% of the op. And you can build in sort of cutoffs that say, hey, as time goes by, you stop sourcing that much because there's more sales activities, etc. So when we think about marketing attribution models, it's not just top of funnel that we need to talk about. You also need to understand, are you trying to deliver, what are you trying to deliver for the sales team? Are you trying to get them just leads that they just cold call? Are you trying to just create opportunities? Are you trying to get stakeholders in existing opportunities? And from there is where you have an open conversation with all the stakeholders and say, I'm going to make this marketing attribution model.
Yeah.
Because it's very different when everybody's in the room, when the sales leaders and the sales development leaders understand the model. They say, oh, it's actually not, they're not going to split the revenue by what marketing sourced or what I did. They just look at, this is what marketing sourced, help us track it so we can do more of the campaigns that brought the revenue, right? Because then they see, then we have a different conversation where we say, hey, marketing brought you these leads, and I can see that their win rate is different, it's higher. Their time to close is shorter, and their average deal size is actually larger because marketing brings you this amount of leads so much faster, right?
Yeah.
So we looked at doing sort of this collaborative model where it's a lead can be sourced by marketing and still be worked by an SD. So at the end of the day, it is going to track the influence that both teams had.
Got it. And I guess, so what I would assume, but please correct me, is then you don't think so much in MQLs anymore. You really think more about like the overall influence in the sales process that marketing efforts had. So, I mean, like, maybe stop here. Like, am I wrong here? Or so MQLs still play a big role, or
this is
so?
the tricky, you've hit the nail on the head, because when we talk about marketing attributions, where you track it so much to the end of the funnel, even if you are in digital, if you're in the digital team and you're looking at how much you're bidding on keywords, you don't, especially for us, we're B2B, we're business to business customers for enterprise companies. Someone that clicks on an ad is going to go through a lot of sales process, talk to a human that drives that sales process for the opportunity to close. So yes, you care about the end result, but you have to tell people like, look, these are the levers that you can actually move. And it changes the mindset to say, I can't change the sales cycle that much. What can I do for it? I can accelerate it, or I can bring you warmer leads. And we say, hey, you actually care a lot about MQLs. You care a lot about those SQLs that you get, right? Have they been qualified? But then you really sort of, this is where your responsibility stops. And for that, then it forces you to start having a service level agreement with the other teams, right? Then we say, well, we're going to have a marketing attribution model because we have an MQL scoring system. So we say, we're only going to give you leads that meet this criteria, our ideal customer persona, or ideal customer profile. We're going to give them to you. Can we have an SLA with a sales team of, can you act on these leads before it's 7 days or 24 hours? Or, hey, here's a demo request. It needs to be actioned in less than 6 hours, right? When you know these things, you say, you will not be in the conversations. A marketer will not join the conversations about pricing and how many seats they're going to buy. Sure. They're just going to make sure I'm going to get you the right stakeholders to have this conversation as quickly as possible. Did it work at the end? Yes, no. Let's talk about the campaign that brought it and how can we do more of that. So in reality, we have a marketing attribution model, so they really care about the MQLs.
Got it. Okay. Maybe I think it could be worth like moving to more, hands-on explanation of how the model works, just to move away from that abstract plane that we're on right now. So maybe you could explain. So how did the model start in its most simple form, and sort of like how did it evolve to what it currently is?
So at its most basic level, it was always about tracking. Can we track as much as possible, and are we tracking it the right way? If your marketing team has a project manager, they are secretly your best ally in a marketing operations environment. I remember I sat down on like my first week and looked at our project manager. I'm like, you need to help me. We need a naming convention that tracks what they're doing. It also tracks these other elements that I know are important in the system. And at the time, we were all a HubSpot shop. How is it that it connects to the next steps in the sales cycle? So we decided it was clear to us that we need to track as much as possible and set several drop-down field properties in HubSpot, because it was one way of bringing some order to it. We didn't. Single text fields are a curse that every person in operations loves to hate. They're very useful when they're done right, but then you're so prone to errors. But it was about, are we leveraging the original source data from HubSpot Analytics, for example? Are we logging in things that come from imports? At our basic level, it was trying to find a way of setting up the sourcing team to identify if it was a sales development rep through some sales tools, or it was an import from the marketing team after an event. How is it that we started setting those up? It started with we called it our CoachHub team, internal value of a property. So it had to be one of several options. That was at its earliest level. And then it also became a point of, okay, so you're sourcing this many leads. How's it looking in the deal? And I think I know we want to go down into the specifics, but it's always important to sort of say, businesses, even if you're a startup or an enterprise business, you have to be comfortable with making decisions with maybe 90 or 80% of the data being accurate, or where there's a fog of war where you don't know that much about it. So you need to sort of at some point say, when is good? When is it? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah. It's like, when you write like a research paper, right? Like at the end, you put sort of like, these are the limitations of that research. And, that's sort of like the context that you have to sort of like read the conclusion here, because everything has limitations. And I think with marketing attribution, certainly there's always trade-offs that have to accept, willingly or not.
Yeah. So we went through these conversations. We had a lot of back and forth with the different sales leaders to sort of understand, well, when you drive a conversation, when you attend a sales event, what is the follow-up that you expect? And it would lead us to complicated things. We would have marketers racing to be the first ones that created the contact in the database, or else a source would be set incorrectly, and then we'd have to manually change it, and it would be cumbersome. Then you need to create a process to accommodate for that. But one thing that became very clear for us at the beginning is that we want to have a model that needed to be rules-based, and there needs to be a path to handle exceptions, but it needs to be written down somewhere where everybody can read it, ideally understand it, but it also needs to be as scalable as possible, right? You need to, at some point, have it run on automations only. It needs to be able to handle a lot of data, a lot of actions points happening across different channels and sales activities and teams that do different things. So it needs to be robust, but it most of all needs to be transparent. You need to be able to, if they ask for it, you need to go roll up your sleeves and get down into the data and say, actually, it was this engagement of these things that brought these activities, and this is why I'm tracking it. And that changes the conversation with the sales team and the marketing teams, because we say, look, I can track everything that happens online. We have tracking cookies. We can see form submissions, but offline things, you need to give me a list, right? And then we say, oh, but so many people registered. Well, is registration the same as an attendance, for example? Right? Is that the same? Does it count for attribution? How do we exclude certain things? These needs to be conversations that we say, hey, but I actually brought you interested people. You followed up because they didn't attend, but I brought it in. These are not easy conversations to have with the sales team. And you will be challenged on those assumptions, and that's good.
Sure.
But you want to have those happening in the open between all stakeholders, because at the end of the day, you're all working for the same company, right? You want the same objectives. So that's something that we really cared about, to sort of bring every stakeholder as much as possible into this.
Yeah. And I mean, that sounds like, I would assume those are quite a few rules. So I guess like a big part of that is just like to have the stakeholder alignment to just make sure, now we aligned on these rules, so we don't need to have alignment all the time. It's more like a one-time effort that like every now and then is tweaked based on the latest, insights. From campaigns, you always need to iterate on these models, right? Like it's never perfect. There's always trade-offs, like we said before, but those rules help you to actually make it scalable and also let you automate it at some point.
And it also has to do with agreements that you have within the company, right? You can also say, hey, we're going to start a new year. We wanted to have certain revisions to the attribution model, and you bring all stakeholders. And sometimes there's disagreement in companies, and that's why we have a hierarchy that some people actually, they're in charge of making those decisions. It's on them. But then we make it very clear, here's option A, here's option B, and then someone's going to make that choice. And then once that choice is made, then we all follow, right? But it also has to do with like getting down into like the specifics. For example, you might have a company that brings in that you can only do purchasing at a certain level with the stakeholders that you get, right? Mm-hmm. If you're selling to enterprise, there's a moment that you might get a prospect that goes to events and goes to conferences and trade shows, etc. But there's going to be a point that they say, okay, so I'm going to purchase in bulk. Let me pass you to my procurement colleague or someone in accounting or finance or my legal team for the RFP. They don't go to trade shows. You don't do any. They don't they don't care about your ebooks or your infographics. How do you track those? Well, you can also sort of have a transparent method where you say, if one team or the marketing team sources the first deal or the first lead that led to an opportunity, then everything else after would be sourced. And then you have a conversation for how long and how much sourcing do you want to give it? And do you track it for the team or do you track it to the specific campaign that was it? Those are good conversations to have, but they also come at a sense of maturity and also budget that your marketing team has. If you are just starting and you are in a if you are just starting and you are in a marketing team that is all about growing and getting new leads, etc. Do you need an attribution model that goes all the way to the end? No, you have conversion. You have top of funnel information that you can do day-to-day decisions. Brand awareness will give you similar things. If you are growing and you have a team across many regions, many languages, and then you start saying, well, where do I put my money? It's not, I can put this money here. You have trade shows, or you have ads, or you have client marketing events like an after hour. That's where an attribution model also helps you make these decisions. Yeah.
Sorry, just closing the door.
Yeah, just 1 second. Sorry.
Sorry. Also gives you a chance to to cough out. Okay.
Sorry,
just my wife just came
my water.
Home. Yeah, hey. All good. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Okay. So, what I would be curious to sorry, let me start differently. Let me ask differently. So, I think this is sort of like also like why a model and the different rules are so important, because like marketing, like you said it earlier, marketing is expensive, so you have to prove ROI constantly. And I think this is a typical story. Companies not doing financially well. Like, not saying CoachHub is not like doing well, but like just as an example, like a company is not doing well, and then very typically companies look at marketing expenditure first and really try to like, okay, I never believed in it, and then they cut budget, and by doing that, maybe they just look at the directly sourced MQLs, but then they don't understand, hey, there were all these other touch points. The marketing team actually created the brand awareness that helped the sales rep or the SDR to even book that first meeting, because the person on the other side of the phone actually knew the name of the company, through different awareness campaigns, or differentiation campaigns that helped explain the product in comparison to all the other products on the market that do something similar or like the same thing. So there's like this, I would say, like tremendous long tail that marketing efforts can have that is really, really hard to track. So I think, it's not only about like this directly sourced MQL and, whether that then turns into booked meetings, but there are all these other touch points, particularly if you do account-based selling, that play a huge role. Like if you're an enterprise, right, then like this is very common. You target the entire sort of like company, the entire account, and try to get your foot in the door, try to really make sure that all the more important stakeholders have heard the name and have seen the product, have a clear understanding of the value proposition as much as possible, of course, because that will ultimately help you when the economic buyer and the decision maker come to the point where they, are faced with the question, do I sign a contract with this company or that company?
Absolutely, because when you have a marketing attribution model, it's not going to be the end solution to every of your marketing problems. And you can't put everything there, right? You might want to start saying, well, can we start tracking the engagement of our design team that participates on the internal sales and making slide decks, et cetera? It's like, yes, but is that the best use of your time? Like if we understand, you also come with a marketing attribution to understand there are things that are going to be outside of it. There is a cost for other things, right? If you really, really want to care about your brand awareness, you can do polling and you can pay. There's companies that will sell you that as a service or will track your press mentions. You can choose to have press hits or mentions of a specific category as a target for that team. But, not every metric is a target. And not every target needs to be a metric. There's also the other side where the marketing attribution model will help you get some transparency around certain things, certain channels. Other things, they're going to be outside of it. If you want to look at brand awareness, you can try to ask your customers, where did they hear about you? But anyone that has ever made a form that says that knows that the kind of answers you get, when you're lucky, they aren't very good, right? Like when you get asked at a supermarket, how did you hear about us? I'm like, I was hungry. You're in the neighborhood. Don't ask me this, right? It's always tricky, but it's a point where the conversation needs to happen with people that understand the limitations of each channel and can also talk to people that, and these are the marketers, right? They know their markets best and their channels best. But then also have a conversation with the sales team to sort of say, well, actually, did I influence you or not? Did you see a change in this? I'm like, oh, yes, they mentioned it on that event that we saw each other, that they had seen an ad somewhere or that someone had mentioned it. But it's not just the marketing attribution model. It's the tracking that comes with it that gets the marketing team focused to say, hey, what can I track and how can I track it as accurately as possible? It changes the conversation to the point that we've had sales VPs that come in and say, hey, this deal, I want to follow up on it. Show me how the attribution is because I think this should be marketing sourced. I had a conversation and they mentioned this and these campaigns. Are we tracking those? Right?
Great.
This is where you switch the conversation and the sales rep realizes marketing is their own channel for inbound leads. And the more information they get, the more information we feed onto the machine of the attribution model, the more complete or the more they will focus those efforts later. It's reached the point that we care, for example, about certain campaigns and we say, hey, please add the contacts to the opportunity, because if you forget to add them, I lose the tracking of this person and this specific op. And then they're like, yeah, let me add as many as possible because I want the tracking that happens behind the scenes to say, yeah, this person that went to this webinar, et cetera, this came in. We've had a case, for example, where our field marketers also talk to the AEs. They get excited. The deals come in. The gong says, hey, this is a huge amount of seats you've sold and coaching for this huge company for this year, et cetera. And then they say, well, I remember them. This company came from this event. and how can we track it, etc. I was like, but I brought you this person. Why is this person that we've done so many things and he's been a speaker? Why is this person not in the op? Oh yeah, I forgot about it. Well, please add it. Right?
Yeah.
You need a model, and this is the part that we've sort of evolved with, to sort of say we want a model that can improve over time, but it's also not bound by time, right? It needs to sort of, if a rep goes to an event and sees a contact and they give them their business card, yes, talk to them. Don't wait for the marketing team to import the leads. You want a marketing attribution model that can go beyond that doesn't care about were you the one that created it at 10 in the morning instead of the marketer that imported the leads at 2 p.m. You need to have a way of sort of tracking this.
Yeah,
we partnered with a company called Magic Robot to help us sort of pull this HubSpot information and sort of deconstruct it and push it out into Salesforce as specific campaigns with engagements at specific times, and also a set of rules that says, if a contact is created on day X, but you have an engagement that from a campaign that we have decoded and it is from a prior time, even before the contact was created in HubSpot or Salesforce, the contact is marketing sourced from this campaign, right? This kind of logic takes away the pressure for the marketing team to say, no, wait until I do the import, right? They do their import, the tracking happens, and then they say, yeah, these leads will get some immediate information when they're created. And once our attribution machine picks it up, a couple of hours later, they're going to show up on the campaigns, and attribution doesn't need to run on demand like that. We don't need to see a marketing attribution model that is, up to date the whole time. Up to date the whole time, I want to see the lead status, for example. It's a different thing. I want to see if a lead is being worked on or not in real time. It's different than, is it from a marketing campaign that happened 4 months ago, right? The urgency sort of, you start having a conversation about which data points do you need now and which data points are important to have at a specific point.
Got it. Yeah. You mentioned the HubSpot. But I know that you also work on Salesforce. So I'm assuming basically HubSpot Marketing Hub is for all the marketing efforts, but then Salesforce is the actual CRM. Why did you make that switch from HubSpot CRM to Salesforce CRM? Did that play a role in terms of marketing attribution, or was that completely outside of that?
So we were in HubSpot shop for a long time, just HubSpot. And we were running into some issues around permissions, around scalability of the tool, that Salesforce, you can do anything you want in Salesforce, and that's a good thing. The bad thing is you can do anything you want. You have to also build it and understand it and maintain it. Yeah. There is no one true solution. So we were scaling up and we're having operations that we needed things around hierarchies and different regions, permissions, reporting, that Salesforce had the most robust set of answers for us. But we also recognize that when it comes to the usability for landing pages, forms, email automations, etc., HubSpot is the best in the market for us.
Yeah, agreed.
So how do we bring those together where they don't really want to play nice with each other? As I said, we had a very distinct marketing tracking of activities, and we were logging each thing. So this is where we partnered with Magic Robot, where we said, guys, we have all this data. Can you please go in, read it, deconstruct it, auto-populate campaigns for us, right? Read a value, identify from our naming convention that it has a region, that it has a type, etc., and create a campaign and an engagement for this contact with this date. These are the moments that a strict naming convention really helped us, because we said, if there are 8 numbers, it's going to be 4 for the year, 2 for the month, 2 for the day, always, year, month, date. So if you see those numbers, that's going to give you the start date of the campaign, put the engagements in at this point. So we partnered with Magic Robot, who goes in and reads, gets information in Salesforce, reads the contacts in HubSpot, converts them, creates campaigns, populates them with engagements, and then runs their attribution model on top of it. where we say, hey, we want to give this much for sourced campaigns and a little bit for influenced, etc. Because our attribution model, we care about opportunities being able to be sourced and influenced as well.
Got it.
We chose that, but there are some interesting things that it's important to note about. For example, Salesforce, you have a limit of tracked fields, right? Of how many fields have been changed by who and what was the previous value. HubSpot doesn't work like that. Every property has a history that you can go back, and you can also query with an API call. So at some point we say, well, there are some properties that we have that are static, but some we can also update regularly from the marketing team. And they will update this value. So read always the latest one or the history of it.
I see.
So now we have a marketing team that lives in HubSpot. They do their day-to-day activities, landing pages, emails, etc. But everything that they report on is on Salesforce campaigns that they create. So it's been an interesting mix. There's always things that we can improve, data changes, etc. But it's an integration that we maintain, but it also has solved us a lot of problems because we've been able to do this automatically with a system. For example, when we reach some problems where we say, hey, why is this opportunity not marketing sourced? We don't go in and change a toggle to say, hey, so from not sourced to sourced. We go in, we find a contact, and we say, where is your engagement to this campaign? And if we say, hey, it wasn't created for this or these reasons, we create that engagement. The attribution model picks it up and says, hey, there's an engagement. This should be part of an op, etc. So this is what I mean, that you also have to have a transparency and robustness in your attribution model. Because you don't want to arbitrate things. If you track marketing engagements, then there needs to be a marketing engagement that the attribution model picks up, because that's how you trace it.
And does it mostly use then contacts? So like my understanding is then basically you attribute the activities to then contacts. And this is then also how sort of like it's like a living thing. It continues to kind of like be updated because like later on maybe like a new contact is in touch with like somebody at the company around like a specific deal. Or is it like that you attribute it to the opportunity specifically? So
what we do is in HubSpot it's just contacts, right? So we log as much as possible under this email, right, which is the unique identifier that HubSpot uses. Once they come in as leads or when they convert later to contacts in Salesforce, what we say is we have campaigns, they have campaign members, and those campaign members have engagements. And this is the interesting thing that Magic Robot does, because they say they've helped us build a system where you have a one-to-one match of the prospect to campaign member, all right? And that's the campaign engagement. But every time there's an opportunity, they do basically an influence split. So if you and I are having this conversation in a podcast, that is one engagement. But if I go later and participate and I'm a member of 5 opportunities, you will see 5 instances of the podcast appear on different splits of the deal.
I see.
Right. Yeah. So that's how we have chosen sort of to attribute these things. So at the end, the podcast campaign can have influenced, a number of various different activities. You can also choose cutoff dates and say, hey, these guys had a conversation in April, but we're now in March the following year. This should have stopped, right? You can also have rules to say there's a time decay. There's things that you count, that you don't count. Is it pre-op only? Is it until the opportunity closes? This is when it gets interesting, right? These are the fun conversations to have, because you have to sort of question and challenge your own sales cycle, which maybe you have to be very dorky like me to find that fun. But
no, I think it's great. I think it's great that you are sort of like advocating for having these conversations around these minute details, but they do play a huge role, right? So I think to your example, if there was a conversation 3 months before, like let's say 12 months earlier, and like that's then since then the opportunity has kind of like been lingering there, or like maybe it was even closed, right? But then the same contact who played a role on that opportunity last year is now contacting company again. Then
and they request a demo, right?
Exactly,
come
and they
in
request a
through an
demo.
inbound channel.
Yeah. Then why? Like, was this because they had this marketing conversation at some point, this touch point, or did the previous rep do such a good job that that contact is reaching out again, or not, right? Like, there's like a lot of things can happen. And you don't necessarily have the insight because maybe that person has left, or maybe they switched jobs, and like there's so many things that can happen. So like it will always be a bit of a black box.
This is also interesting why we talked about the attribution model being rules based. You want rules that encompass the majority of the scenarios and sort of give you the indication that when you need to do when there's an exception, you deal with it manually, but because it's going to be an exception. But for example, something that you mentioned is like, what happens when a sales team brings in a contact or a prospect and they engage and then they do nothing. And then they come back because of a marketing activity. They click an ad, they download something, they participate in an event, and it's silence in the CRM, and then it's a marketing engagement. Should the source change if the opportunity comes in? Because is it reactivated by marketing? Do you bring it back or not? This is also the point that you need to have those conversations with the team and say, well, I don't think this is enough. Or, for example, like the ones, some of the conversations that I've had this back and forth is registration the same as an attendance, right? You fill out a form and that's effort. And we want to honor the recognition of, hey, someone sat down and online clicked the form and gave you these details. But did they also go to the thing that they registered, right? Where is it that I think, this is not exactly the same? And you need alignment. And these are tough conversations to have, but you need to come from it as a RevOps. Sometimes in organizations is seen as the bad guys with a stick. And the point here is not to beat other teams with the stick. It's about we are together to beat the problem with the stick together. I believe that in the RevOps organizations, like for me, we are at the function of the sales team, right? So it is about having the conversation with them of saying, I need to have a difficult conversation with you on your channel, and how long it's effective, for example, for us to sort of track it correctly. Because maybe we say you click on an ad and that our ads are so niche and so exclusive that if you click on it, you really got to want this. And then you're sourced or influenced for the whole time that you exist in our database. Or maybe there's a time decay. Maybe we have a cutoff at a year or 3 months. And if we have this conversation, not just with the person in the digital channel, but the whole marketing team, it's about, hey, can you guys complement each other? What happens if I click on an ad and then download something? Can we keep that person sort of sourced? If we keep the lead warm? Is the cutoff when we pass it to the sales team? Or do we also want to track the activities that we can do while the sales conversation is ongoing?
Yeah.
Because then we can come to the sales team and say, hey, we accelerate your deals, right? I can see in Salesforce the number of touch points, time to close, when it's an influence deal, when it's a source deal, when it's a source and influence deal, or when there's nothing happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's great. I think we can talk about this for, many more hours. Marketing attribution is a wide field, but I think a key takeaway for me here is really, as a RevOps, as an ops person, your job is to facilitate, to have these tough conversations about the details, and then also help on the execution side to make it work on a purely technical level that is also scalable. So, and I think this is where attribution model with clear rules that are transparent and good to understand, but also allow for discussions to change them. I think this is, where they play like a really big role, or where this plays like a really big role. So we always ask this one question all the guests that come to our show. And the question is, like, looking back at your career, what advice would you give your younger self or someone just starting out?
I think, especially in the ops section, I would say you're helping people solve certain problems that maybe they don't understand. And within the ops, if you're in an ops role, right, you're behind the machine. You're in the engine room where things happen. They don't need to understand the whole thing, but they need to trust you, and you need to trust them too. And you have to build partnerships around that. The trust is the saying says trust is earned by the spoonful and lost by the bucket load.
Yes.
These stakeholders, you need them, and it takes time, and you need to earn their trust. But we are here to solve them. They don't need to understand the problem. You need to solve it for them, and they need to understand why your job is important. So we are at their service, and we need to earn their respect. And they are very good at what they do. So how can we help them? Right. This is at least
Great.
how I recommend it to myself.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a really good attitude to have in operations, particularly for someone who still has to earn their stride, so to say. Thank you very much, Daniel. It was a great discussion. Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Have a good one. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.